How about visiting my parents this Christmas? That's how it all began, and it marked the start of a very difficult period. My name is Mary, and I'm a 35-year-old housewife. I met my husband Jack at work, and what began as a workplace romance led to marriage. Shortly after, we were blessed with our lovely daughter Emily. I decided to quit my job to focus on raising her, and now, at 6 years old, it was time for us to visit Jack's parents for the first time. Their home was quite far from ours. "Hey, is dinner ready yet?" My mother-in-law's voice echoed through the house. "Yes, just a moment," I replied, bustling around the kitchen. Her gaze, cold and critical, followed me. "You're so slow, Jack. How can you stand such a sluggish wife? Other wives are much more efficient. She really is too slow, and it's a problem." I was taken aback. What was Jack doing? He was sprawled on the couch, watching TV as usual. I wanted to argue back, but my mother-in-law's words kept coming. "After breakfast, you've got yard work, then organizing the attic, and after that, cleaning out the shed." It was supposed to be Christmas, a time for relaxation, yet here I was, working non-stop while my husband did nothing. I was exhausted and could barely move. I collapsed on the living room couch, sighing deeply. "Who said you could rest? Start on lunch now," my mother-in-law commanded, not missing a beat. "I've been working all this time. Can I rest for a bit?" I pleaded. "A wife is essentially a maid. You think you can just sit around and eat for free? Get to work." My husband's hometown was in the countryside, where old customs still held sway. It was an outdated way of thinking, but even in the past, wives hadn't worked this hard. "Can you give me a hand, honey?" I asked. "No way," Jack replied curtly. He did nothing at home and was even worse at his parents' place, just drinking and lounging around. "I need to go buy some groceries. Will you come with me?" I asked. The supermarket was far, and since Jack had been drinking since morning, I had no choice but to walk, as I didn't have a license. A 30-minute walk one way was too much for me alone, so I asked if he could at least help carry the groceries. His response was a quick, "No way." I was furious. I imagined throwing a trash can at him, but instead, I trudged to the store alone. "Fine, I'll just buy tons of marshmallows." Finally, I made it back after a grueling 30-minute walk. Carrying groceries in both hands, I staggered into Jack's parents' house, completely exhausted. I set the bags down and collapsed into the entrance, letting out a long sigh. Just then, I heard my mother-in-law's irritated voice. "Hurry up, you're as slow as your mother." "I'm sorry," I heard my daughter Emily apologize in response. At that moment, I felt like a robot running on empty, my energy completely drained. Ignoring my fatigue, I sprang up and hurried toward the source of the voices, stepping over my husband, who was lounging around. I thought I heard a faint whimper from beneath me, but I ignored it for now. I rushed into the kitchen, where the voices were coming from, and saw the scene unfolding. "What's going on?" I demanded. My mother-in-law and daughter both turned to look at me. "Mom, you're back?" Emily's face lit up, her eyes still glistening with tears. My mother-in-law was seated in a chair, looking haughtily at the scene. "What are you doing?" I asked. My mother-in-law snorted, and Emily explained hesitantly. "Grandma said she was hungry and told me to start cooking." "My goodness," my mother-in-law interrupted. "A useless granddaughter who can't even cook. What have you been teaching her? Like mother, like daughter? I wonder if she's really my son's child." I couldn't hold back anymore. "She's only 6 years old. How can you expect her to cook? And to say such things to your own granddaughter?" My mother-in-law's face flushed red with anger. "What are you implying? An old woman like me shouldn't work? You're the terrible one here. A wife is like a maid. It's natural for her to work quietly. And the daughter of a maid? She's also a maid. Who do you think lets you live comfortably? It's my son's hard-earned money you're spending. It's only right to respect your husband and me. Stop complaining and get to work, maid." With that, she stormed out of the kitchen. I was left stunned, unable to come up with a response. I was too stunned to find the words. My mother-in-law had gone to the living room where my husband was, and I could hear snippets of their conversation. "Your wife is so useless, not even as good as a maid. But don't worry, Emily will grow up and be useful. Just a bit of patience. You've had a tough time, haven't you? You know you can always come back home. Divorce might be a good idea, but we'll need a maid. Maybe we should all live together. I'm fed up with my job anyway. Let her work and I'll enjoy a laid-back life in the countryside." My husband's horrifying statement left me in shock. I was stunned into silence. "Oh, That sounds good, my mother-in-law agreed. I stood there, frozen, fists clenched tightly. Suddenly, a warm hand gently covered mine. It was Emily. I looked down at her concerned face. She gazed up at me, worry etched on her features. I crouched down to her level and spoke softly. Emily, do you like Daddy? She hesitated, not answering immediately. Of course she wouldn't. My husband had been indifferent to parenting. He barely interacted with Emily or me. When he came home from work, he lounged on the sofa, watching TV or fiddling with his phone. On weekends, he went out drinking and came home late. Since he couldn't go out much anymore, he had taken to drinking at home until late, his hangovers becoming a routine. During long weekends, he either lays at home or went out with friends. We rarely had family outings. When was the last time we went on one? How many months or even years had it been since we had a family trip disguised as a visit to the in-laws? I was certain my husband didn't even know what grade our daughter was in at school. He was completely unaware of her likes, dislikes, or aspirations for the future. It was no wonder Emily couldn't say she liked her father. He showed no interest in her life. So I asked her again, do you like Grandma? I hate her, was her immediate response. I couldn't help but smile slightly. No surprise there, considering how she was always being yelled at. But then Emily said something that took me by surprise. Grandma bullies Mom. It's supposed to be Christmas, but Mom never gets to relax. She's always being told to do this and that. Grandma is mean. Children observe more than we often realize. With all the direct commands my mother-in-law issued, it was clear Emily was aware of the situation. I chuckled and asked, Emily, would you like to live with Grandma? She shook her head. What about Dad? I don't need him, she responded immediately. Her quick answer confirmed my decision. The next morning, I took Emily out early. By the time we returned to my in-law's home, it was already dark. As we walked in, my mother-in-law and husband, looking irritated, were waiting for us. Finally back. Where have you been? My husband demanded. Just out and about, I replied, evading his question. My mother-in-law commented, young wives these days. Fine, you're officially a maid now. Hey maid, I'm hungry. Where's dinner and tea? As usual, she was the boss. I silently served tea to both of them. When my husband reached for his teacup, I swiftly snatched it away. What the heck? He exclaimed, looking dumbfounded. I then deliberately poured the tea over him. Don't worry, it's cooled down, I said. That's not the point, he protested. I continued pouring the tea, skillfully dodging his attempts to grab the cup. I set the teacup down with a clink. How dare you, you air maid? My mother-in-law's eyes bulged with anger. Shut up, I said firmly. I am not your maid or anything else. I retorted fiercely, and my mother-in-law stood up, ready to yell. I cut her off before she could speak. What? A son's wife is not a maid. If you didn't know that, let me teach you. I am not a maid, I declared, pressing my point. My mother-in-law's mouth flapped open and closed, but no words came out. I glared at her, my frustration boiling over, and leaned in close. Her face contorted with anger, and she let out a high-pitched scream, clearly uncomfortable with our proximity. Unbothered, I moved even closer until our faces were only inches apart. Listen carefully, I said, my voice firm. There is no system in this world that lets you exploit a daughter-in-law as you please. I will protect my family, but I have no intention of being a family servant. What? I am your husband's mother. I am family. You should protect me and follow my orders, she retorted, her face turning a deep shade of red. Are you okay in the head? If I were really a maid, I wouldn't be family. How can you claim to be family if you're treating me like a servant? I replied calmly. Her face, which had been pale moments before, flushed bright red. How dare you talk to me like that? You're so rude. Who do you think you are? I am your mother-in-law. Save the jokes for when you're alone, I said, cutting her off. I had been incredibly patient, but my tolerance had reached its limit. And what about your granddaughter? Do you think she's a maid too? I added, leaning in closer. Her face turned pale again, like a traffic light, showing her weakness. The disparity between her grandstanding and her actual behavior was disappointing. Her bravado had crumbled with just a little resistance, revealing her shallow nature. I pulled back, narrowing my eyes in disgust. My mother-in-law, now pale and trembling slightly, was clearly shaken. I turned to my husband, my frustration evident. Now it's your turn. Oh, okay, my husband replied weakly, his voice almost pathetic. I glared at him. What have you been doing while your wife and daughter were treated like maids? I was just playing with my phone and drinking beer, he mumbled. I used their mistreatment as a sort of background for my drinks. How privileged, I said coldly. Sorry doesn't cut it. If you need the police. No, he screamed in a panic as I shouted with a fierce expression. He tried to hide behind his mother, attempting to escape. Frustrated and with a headache, I decided to get straight to the point. I pulled out a piece of paper and held it up. Just sign this and we'll be done with it. Ha! What's this? My husband, peeking out cautiously from behind his mother, asked. They look like a turtle and its hatchling. The color drained from his face as I explained. It's a divorce agreement. We're getting divorced, so I won't be coming here ever again. Both my mother-in-law and husband were left speechless. I've already contacted a lawyer and will start the procedures after the holiday. So, sign quickly. No way, he protested, his voice cracking, almost in tears. I don't want a divorce. I don't want it to be a problem that I won't be around, my husband said, desperation in his voice. You're relieved to have me do everything for you. It's convenient to have me as a maid, and that's why divorce bothers you. Is that so? I replied coldly. Caught in your own words, aren't you? This feels like déjà vu. Moments ago, he had screamed at me in terror of my anger. Regardless of whether he signed the papers or not, I was determined to proceed. I had already informed my family. Emily, are you ready? I called out. Yes, Mom, she responded cheerfully, popping her head out with her own bag in hand. I've packed all my stuff. I turned to my husband, luggage in hand, and said, We're going to my parents' house now. What? He exclaimed. Don't joke. The only joke here is your behavior, I said firmly. A husband who visits his family just to treat his wife and daughter like maids is no joke. We'll discuss the divorce properly with a lawyer. Goodbye. With that, I picked up our luggage and, alongside Emily, headed toward the entrance. My husband followed desperately. Wait, you can't live without me. I stopped abruptly and slowly turned around. He did the same, confusion on his face. Did you forget something? I asked. What's that? He replied, puzzled. Don't you remember? I was more successful and earned more than you before I left work for pregnancy. Even then, I was making more than you do now. His face went ashen. Had he forgotten we once worked at the same place? His selective memory was astounding. It's been a while since I quit my job, I continued, but it's time to start working again, little by little. My parents have said they'll help, and I plan to stay with them for a while. I'll gradually return to work. Even if I can't earn as much as before, I'll manage. No, I will make it work. Seeing my resolve, my husband was nearly in tears. I'm sorry, I'll change. I swear, please just don't divorce me, my husband pleaded, desperation in his voice. You had many chances to change, but you wasted them all. It's too late to regret it now. With that, I reached for the front door. Wait, my mother-in-law called out, irritation evident in her tone. I turned back to see her with a troubled expression. What is it? I asked, my voice rising in frustration. What about my dinner? She demanded. I don't care, I shot back defiantly. And with that, we truly left her house. Emily and I headed straight to my parents' home. They greeted us with warm smiles. Well, what a rough start to Christmas, my mother said kindly, encouraging us to sit in the living room. Relieved, Emily began peeling an orange. Christmas is really about family gatherings, I reflected. It was tough, but I hope next year we can spend it in peace. With that thought, I resolved to make a wish. The next day, the divorce negotiations with my husband, who continued to insist he didn't want a divorce, were challenging. However, given our daughter's rejection of her father, we managed to finalize everything. The alimony was paid in a lump sum. I couldn't trust him with anything else. As a result, the apartment was sold, and my ex-husband Jack moved back in with his mother. Things took a turn when my ex called, complaining about how things had unfolded. It seemed the neighbors had noticed how I had been overworked, and news of our divorce spread quickly through the rural gossip network. My former mother-in-law was now looked at unfavorably by the community. Well, that's understandable, I thought. Calling one's daughter-in-law a maid is unacceptable, no matter the setting. It's incredibly outdated. As a result, my former mother-in-law became more reclusive and began treating her son like a servant. They argued daily, and Jack's complaints over the phone didn't concern me. I planned to let him know that the alimony had been deposited and then hang up. "You're getting what you deserve," I said coldly. I could almost hear his despair on the other end. "Please help me out a little. I'm Emily's father and she's my mother's granddaughter." I smiled to myself and replied, "I'm busy right now." "What's with that tone? I'm tipsy and can't help you." "Wait a minute. I admit I was wrong," he started to say. "Why do you think I'm coming to help?" I yelled and hung up. I promptly set his number to reject calls. Laughter, they say, brings good fortune. I couldn't stop laughing for a long while.